This is part 7 of Federalist number 16, and it happens to be paragraph number 7. Let me read it to you. The result of these observations to an intelligent mind must be clearly this, that if it be possible, at any rate, to construct a federal government capable of regulating the common concerns and preserving the general tranquility, it must be founded as to the objects committed to its care upon the reverse of the principle contended for by the opponents of the proposed Constitution. It must carry its agency to the persons of the citizens. This part is very important. It must carry its agency to the persons of the citizens. It must stand in need of no intermediate legislations, but must itself be empowered to employ the arm of the ordinary magistrate to execute its own resolutions. The majesty of the national authority must be manifested through the medium of the courts of justice. The government of the Union, like that of each state, must be able to dress itself immediately to the hopes and fears of individuals, and to attract its support those passions which have the strongest influence upon the human heart. It must, in short, possess all the means and have a right to resort to all the methods of executing the powers with which it is entrusted, that are possessed and executed by the government of the particular states. Okay, this is the most important part of this Federalist number. Remember, it says it must be founded as to the objects committed to its care upon the reverse of the principle contended for by the opponents of the proposed Constitution. It must carry its agency to the persons of the citizens. In other words, when we unite the country under a federal union instead of a confederacy that we have now, under a federal union, the federal government can hold people responsible when they break the federal law. And it doesn't need, and look at the next sentence, it must stand in need of no intermediate legislation. In other words, it doesn't have to go to any of these states to say, I need your help to keep this citizen accountable. Let's say if somebody in North Carolina broke the law, broke the federal law, the federal government does not need to go to the state of North Carolina and ask whether it can hold this person accountable. And another thing it says, which is very important, the majesty of the national authority must be manifested through the medium of the courts of justice. So at first, if a person breaks the law, we will take him to the federal courts if it's a federal law. Okay? At that time, I'm kind of trying to make it simple for you. So it says, in a republic, you don't assume the person is guilty. You take him to the court, you prove their guilt, and the magistracy of the law takes place. In other words, the person is accountable to the law, and you punish them accordingly. If it's a light punishment, you might just give them a penalty, a fine. If it's more, then you can decide on that. But that's the first step. And here he says, gradually he says, now if they are not accountable, then if they don't come to the court, then you can force them by other means. But he says the federal government understands that the first thing, the most important thing it has to do is, he talks about the strongest influence upon the human heart. In other words, it wants, and then it talks about address itself immediately to the hopes and fears of individuals. In other words, when you as an individual trust the federal government to do the right thing, to actually be a help to you in case your state government starts to step on your rights, then the federal government will come to your help. So in that case, the federal government should try to be the friend of the citizen. So it's not only when they break the law that the federal government appears, but even at other times where federal government is needed. Federal government help is needed. For example, look at these hurricanes we've had in the United States. A lot of help comes from the federal government, not just from the state government. A lot of state governments don't have enough money. But unfortunately, you see a lot of these people in the same states that are asking for help from the federal government, they turn around and talk bad about the federal government. So they are not very fair when that happens. So here, that's what Publius, our writer, is saying that the federal government can be your friend. It's not just that when you break the law, the federal government comes after you, but when you have an emergency, when there's hurricanes, when there's floods, when there's all sorts of stuff that might happen that your state government might not be able to help you, federal government comes and touches your human heart. That's what he says here. It becomes your friend. You just don't see it as a overwhelming power. And the next short paragraph, to this reasoning it may perhaps be objected that if any state should be disaffected to the authority of the Union, it could at any time obstruct the execution of its laws and bring the matter to the same issue of force, with the necessity of which the opposite scheme is reproached. When it says the states are disaffected, means the states are not friendly to the Union. Now, if the states are not friendly to the Union, they can block or not cooperate with the federal government. He says this, and in the next paragraph, we will talk about this a little bit more. But here, let me share something that's very important with you. Suppose the first 10 amendments of the Constitution of the United States, these are the amendments that were added after the Constitution came out of the Convention. These are called the Bill of Rights. But what is interesting, I did not know that till a few years after I started studying American history. These Bills of Rights were only applicable to the federal government. They were not applicable to the states. States a lot of times said, no. You say no religious test for office? That's for federal positions. We might want to have religious test for who becomes who becomes a member of the state legislature. And a whole lot of other things, like freedom of religion, things like that. Some of these states still had something like established religion. You had to be most likely belong to the church that was the established church of the state, that the state supported. So all these things did not happen overnight. It took many years, many years for a Bill of Rights to be applied to the states. Actually, it took almost 175 years before it seriously started getting applied to the states. So keep this in mind. Everything did not unfold overnight in the United States, unfortunately. So keep that in mind, and we will come back to paragraph number 9 in the next video.